Hello there, and welcome to the EDC Empire. Today, we are going to be taking a look at the Jack Wolf Knives Vampire Jack. Before I get into the review further, I just want to make a few notes about the Vampire Jack. Firstly, I'm going to be talking mainly about the second version or drop of the Vampire Jack, which was dropped last year in October. This version had a blade steel change from M390 to S90V and a slight change in the size of the sharpening choil. Other than that, the differences between drop 1 and drop 2 should be negligible, so keep that in mind. Also, I'm going to be primarily talking about the Vampire Jack. However, some of the notes that I will have will be about Jack Wolf knives in general and about some of the other slip joints. With that being said, let's get into my review of the Vampire Jack. The Vampire Jack is designed by Ben Belkin, who owns Jack Wolf Knives. All of Jack Wolf Knives are OEM'd in China. However, we don't know exactly who makes them, so keep that in mind. However, that being said, the overall quality of Jack Wolf Knives is superb. Fit and finish is wonderful. Edges are pretty good on average, and just the action on both their slip joints and their locking knives is really quite excellent. So don't let it being made in China worry you. Also, before we get into some of the details of this knife, I want to talk about the extras, which you can see some of which are right here. You get a puck, 2 stickers, one of which are shown here, and a slip with all of your slip joints. You get all of these along with a tube with tube art, which is done custom for each different model. And yeah, that's pretty much everything, along with a cloth, which the knife is wrapped in, that you get with a slip joint. If you get a locking knife, there are slight changes, like not getting a slip and getting a pocket clip insert, but that is for another discussion and another review, which is coming up soon. The Vampire Jack is a non-locking knife, which means it is a slip joint with a back spring and a nice around a 7, maybe an 8 pull. So really quite a nice pull, and kind of in my more preferred area. To open it, you can either use the Nailnick, but I find that I usually just pinch it open, and that works really well with access, which is given. The blade, as I mentioned earlier, is S90V with 60 to 61 HRC and a hand satin finish. There have been other versions with machine satin finishes, DLC, and a few other different finishes, but this is the hand satin finish on this version with jigged titanium. The blade shape is spear point with a very nice hollow grind, meaning that the edge is extremely thin, but it thickens a little bit up towards the tip, which means that it can really be used for most EDC tasks and maybe even a little bit of hard use. I mainly kept this to breaking down boxes, opening up packages, and more medium to light use EDC work, but I did try stripping wires, cutting wires and whatnot, and this performed wonderfully. The overall measurements of the Vampire Jack is 6.85 inches when open and 3.85 inches when closed, and has an overall depth when folded of 1.04 inches, which is going to be measured right here with this handle swell. You have a width at the pivot of 0.46 inches, which means that compared to your PM2, it is quite a bit, or just slightly thinner. Then getting into some size comparisons, we'll bring out the PM2 and the Delica 4. As you can see here, it is smaller than both, but more on the size of the Delica. Then bring in 2 more size comparisons. We have the Benchmade Bug Out and the Svivi Elementum. Again, smaller than both of these, but kind of sort of on par, and definitely with the amount of handle which you're receiving when compared to the Benchmade Bug Out and the Elementum. The blade length is almost exactly 3 inches with an edge length of 2.65. Then you have a blade stock of 0.12 inches, which means that it's about on average, and with that hollow grind, it really does mean that you can have a really nice slicey profile. You have a weight of 2.89 ounces, which means that with the blade to handle ratio, you're looking at a pretty carryable, or actually a very carryable knife. It's also important to note that with the covers that could come, or that you can get with different versions of the Vampire Jack, it may be more or less heavy, so just keep that in mind. This is the full titanium jade version, so just as a reminder. Okay, now let's get into my overall thoughts of the Vampire Jack. Firstly, there is the obvious note that this is a slip joint. It's not going to be a locking knife, so you've just got to kind of keep that in mind. If you don't like slip joints, this is going to kind of be a turnoff. But to be honest, in my opinion, this is one of the best first high-end slip joints. I don't think this is a great first ever slip joint, but if you're looking to kind of make a jump into high-end slip joints and are kind of interested in modern slip joints, this is definitely an option, and something that you should consider. The high pull, with between probably a 7 and 8, maybe a 7.5, means that it's not worrisome to use compared to some of my other slip joints, and it has a really wonderful walk and talk, which just means that overall fidgeting or just using this knife has been a pleasure. The one thing that you should note is that if you like to take apart your knives, the Vampire Jack, or really any of the slip joint knives by Jack Wolf Knives, are not great for that. They do have Torx head screws on the pivot and on the body, but Ben has said multiple times in his overview videos that you should not take them apart, as putting them back together requires specialized tools because of how strong these springs are. And I'm pretty sure that it will void any sort of warranty which Jack Wolf Knives offers. Getting into the positives, because really there aren't many negatives on this knife, the comfort of the Vampire Jack is really, really fantastic. I was kind of curious to see how these coffin-shaped swells were going to perform, and actually I have to say it's been really nice. The front swell fits really nicely between my middle and ring finger, and then the back swell just kind of goes right in my palm, and it's really just a nice experience getting into a pinch grip. It's a little bit longer of a knife than I like to get on a pinch grip, but you can definitely do it, and overall most grips that I've tried to do is really quite wonderful. And you can again, of course, do a kind of flipped grip because of that swell, and it's really quite wonderful as well. So anything that you'd want to do with that works as well. The blade, as I said earlier, has really, really fantastic geometry. That hollow grind means that you have a lot of sharpening life before you get up to thicker blade, and you also, that spear point means that you have a really easy time just dragging it along material, and yeah, it's just been a joy to use the Vampire Jack. One thing I will note, getting back to the fact that this is a slip joint, is that one-handing this knife closed is very possible, but you should be careful of it. The only time I've ever hurt myself with the Vampire Jack was doing this exact movement, and I did not have my finger past these 3 lines, and it pinched me kind of right here on my pointer finger, and yeah, it wasn't a great time. But other than that, this knife has really been a joy. I have no complaints about it. These do come in at $300. All the Jack Wolf Knives slip joints do, which is expensive. There is no doubt about that, but the quality is definitely there. The back spacer is always flat. Even when you have it at the half position, it's flat with the titanium. Everything fits together really nicely. As long as you keep it oiled, everything just flows. I mean, the titanium has weared really nicely. I've forced some of this with some sandpaper, but even before I forced it, it looked really, really nice. I mean, I have no real major complaints about this knife. I genuinely love carrying it. I always carry one of my slip joints, or when I'm carrying a slip joint, I always make sure to also carry some sort of locking knife. But they're really just wonderful pieces that if you want a more modernized slip joint, because they are definitely a little bit less intimidating than whipping out something like a PM2, this is a great option, and you should really consider pretty much any Jack Wolf model. If you own any Jack Wolf models, but especially the Vampire Jack, please comment down below what you think about them. And if you enjoyed this review, please consider liking and subscribing. Thanks for watching.